Welcome to ongoing election coverage by Town Meeting Television. This is one of many forums we are bringing you in advance of local elections and town meeting on the first Tuesday in March 1st, 2022. Town meeting is traditionally where voters weigh in on local government representation, municipal budgets, school budgets, and local ballot items. All candidates on the ballot are invited to participate in Town Meeting Television election forums. Town Meeting Television election forums introduce you to community decision makers and connect you with the issues that shape your local community. If you're watching this live, we welcome your questions at 802-862-3966. Watch Town Meeting Television on Comcast Channel 1087, Burlington Telecom Channel 17 and 217, as well as online on Town Meeting Television's YouTube page. My name is Elaine Haney, and today we are doing a candidate forum with 3 candidates for the South Burlington School District Board. We have Kate Bailey, who is running unopposed for a 2-year seat. We have Michelle Boyer, who is running unopposed for a 3-year seat, and Chelsea Tillinghast, who is running unopposed to complete 2 years of a 3-year seat. So we have many questions to ask, and candidates will have an opportunity to start with a 1-minute opening statement, and we're going to start that with Chelsea. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Chelsea Tillinghast, a native Vermonter. I moved to Burlington to go to UVM, and I graduated in 2017, and I've lived in South Burlington for the past 3 years. I'm a small business owner for about 5 years now, and I just had my daughter, my first child, in October, and I'm just hoping to better our community, make it a better place for children and teachers alike.
Thank you, Chelsea. Kate.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Elaine and Town Meeting TV for having me. My name is Kate Bailey. I moved to Vermont and to South Burlington 5 years ago. My day job is as a paralegal at the Office of the Healthcare Advocate at Vermont Legal Aid, and my professional background is in healthcare policy and public health. So one of the, as I've been watching the last 2 years with the COVID pandemic play out, I've been really called to volunteer, knowing how difficult it's been navigating this, both the physical toll and the mental toll that COVID has taken on our school district and our community. I also started following the work of the school board about a year to 18 months ago, specifically around the racial justice work they were undertaking. I have been involved in the community around that work, and I think my background in equity are assets here. And I'm a creative thinker. I believe in public service, and I believe in strong schools and strong public education. So that's what brings me here today. Thanks.
Thank you. Go ahead, Michelle.
Hi, thanks for having me. My name is Michelle Boyer. I'm the mother of an SBHS 2021 graduate and a current sophomore. My professional background and expertise is in educational research and measurement, cross-cultural assessment and linguistics, educational policy, and educational accountability systems. Recently, I have spent a lot of time working with multiple state agencies, Vermont not being one of them directly, but multiple states, to support fair assessments, accountability planning, and effective, accurate, and transparent reporting practices. I'll just highlight really quickly 2 main priorities that I've had in mind as I approached this campaign. And the first is academic recovery, including special focused attention to equity matters. We've learned a great deal about the disparate impact of the pandemic on many aspects of student outcomes in our schools here and across the country. I also hope to contribute to...
Michelle, that's been a minute. So
okay, all right, you got my one priority then.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have time to address the other.
Okay, no problem.
But you all did touch on COVID a little bit, so let's start with our first question on that. What has been the impact of COVID on students over the last 2 years, and how do you think we should learn from that experience? Michelle, why don't we start with you?
Great. The impact has been extraordinary. I've spent a lot of time, dealing with the actual data coming out of assessment systems and accountability systems. So I just point by point, although students have for sure learned a lot about epidemiology, evidence shows tremendous losses in the opportunity to learn. It also has shown us that those effects are greater for traditionally marginalized groups. Proficiency rates in all subjects are down, and they're down more dramatically than we've ever seen, more than a typical bounce that we would see in normal times, even in difficult times. The use of mental health services is up. Our students, my own included, lost and continue to lose many events that have been hallmarks of a positive high school experience. That's primarily my frame of reference as a parent, as my kids are in high school. Schools needed to learn a whole new way to conduct the business of teaching and learning in a single moment. And we learned that although a select few students thrived in an online environment, students generally struggled with learning and with motivation. Some even gave up. What should we learn? We have a lot of work to do to help students recover. That involves individual diagnostic information and action plans at the student level. Teachers need more professional development and paraeducators and tutoring supports. I believe that this is parts of this are underway already as a part of the recovery plan for the district. We need a point-by-point accounting of progress on the recovery plan, and we need to address any gaps. Finally, we need fair but strong accountability for that recovery.
Thank you. Kate, would you answer that same question, please?
Sure. So I've been thinking about how it's so hard to fully understand the impact that COVID has had on our students in our district while we're still in it, which we are still in it, hitting that 2-year mark quite soon. And I think a big takeaway that I've seen is that we can't assume that one size fits all when we are making decisions and trying to find solutions to the impact and the problems that COVID has brought upon the teachers and support staff and students. So I think it's important that we be adaptable. And I think communication, very clear, accessible communication when changes are being rolled out is key to success as we continue on in this pandemic. I think it's also really important that we create learning environments that meet kids where they're at right now and not use a 2019 pre-pandemic lens to have those pre-pandemic expectations on our kids after the last 2 years. I think the world is just a different place. And we need to realize that kids are affected differently. We need to respond in ways that leaves room for that ambiguity, and make sure that our kids have a learning space where they feel safe, and that's really addressing their physical, social, emotional, and mental health so that they can learn.
Thank you. Chelsea.
I think that, as hard as COVID has been, a real benefit to a huge change in our status quo is just illuminating how much teachers do, how important community is, and how important connection is. And I just think that it's an opportunity for us to bolster and change our programming and try to offer just a rich variety of options to maybe help students, not just where they're at, but just like completely flipping everything on its head and looking at what is the best way to serve our kids. There's like a huge opportunity because they're nowhere near the status quo. And so changing everything to just serve them and not like focus on what we think we were supposed to do, but what we actually need to do. As like hard as COVID has been for so many, I feel like it's also been an opportunity for us to take a really close look at what we were doing and what maybe we should be doing instead.
Okay. So the next question, let's start with Kate as our first responder to that. South Burlington's educational infrastructure is aging while the student population is growing. What do you think needs to happen statewide and in South Burlington to support schools?
Thanks for the question. And I also sit on the South Burlington Energy Committee. And so where my mind goes with this question is the intersection of our aging infrastructure and growing enrollment and our statewide and our local goals addressing climate action plans and addressing climate change. And I think about weatherization and renewable energy and ways that we can really align those goals while teaching kids about the value of taking care of our environment, and really modeling that in renovations, in upgrades to our utility systems in the schools. I'm also paying attention to the conversations at the state level around pupil weighting. I think because South Burlington is one of the larger districts in the state, and we have a fairly diverse population of students, that those state changes are really going to have quite a big impact on our district. And we need to be judicious with the funding that we have and the tax, I'm very conscientious with the tax rate and keeping affordability in our town reasonable, while also making those important investments in our students. And I don't think we really gain on our investments by delaying renovations and work that needs to be done. I think addressing those needs and making them as energy efficient and as clean energy as possible is really a great way to bring a lot of our goals together.
Okay, thank you. Michelle, would you mind answering that question, please? You're muted, Michelle.
There we go. So I'll separate my response into two parts. And the reason is I think that the aging infrastructure is substantively different than a growing population. And I think they have somewhat different approaches, however they may intersect. So I'll start by treating them as separate challenges. Regarding infrastructure, not having all of the details at hand about trade-offs between this and that, I think the most responsible way to approach this as a newbie is to really just approach it with the perspective that for sure these things, they have to be fixed. We've heard plenty of stories about structural issues, about heating, banging on equipment so the students aren't cold that day, plumbing issues in the schools, and we absolutely need to take care of those. I completely agree with Kate that sooner than later is definitely the best plan, and I agree it needs to be in the most cost-effective way, and that it doesn't rest on a single point of failure. This notion that there's one person in all of Vermont that can fix the heating system. That clearly is a challenge. Space issues. If there are plans in place for housing growth to which we can tie a realistic expectation about student growth, then we really have to talk about space and the possibility of new structures. But we also need to balance those discussions with up-to-date and credible research findings on the relationship between classroom size, teacher resources, and student outcomes. We really need to take care that we're not inaccurately linking facility solutions to expected improvement in learning outcomes.
That's time. Okay. And Chelsea, could you answer the question, please?
Sure. So I definitely believe in a systemic approach. I think that if you have one aspect of any system that's not functioning appropriately or to its best, then it pulls and strains on other resources. So I don't think there's any benefit, to echo Kate, in waiting to make repairs. I think that will just make repairs further down the road more expensive potentially. I also see this as a really exciting opportunity, echoing Kate, not that I have the same perspective, I'm not on any committees currently, but an opportunity to make more environmentally friendly changes, climate action in our schools would be excellent, not only as an educational opportunity, but just a wonderful impact on our city. And then addressing higher enrollment and not enough space. I am wondering, I don't know, but maybe COVID is impacting how many students can be in a space at once because of social distancing. I'm not really sure how to tackle that challenge, but being a science major from UVM, I'll follow the data and try to make really informed decisions about how best to tackle that issue.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is, do you support this year's school budget of $58 million? Let's start with Chelsea.
I do. So I haven't looked at the budget extensively, and I would open my email up to anyone who'd like to offer their opinion. But I definitely support increasing funding for the school. I think some of it is state funded, so it's not all a burden on the taxpayers. And if I understand, there was also a 90 million surplus in the education budget statewide last year. So maybe there's opportunities for us to lessen what the taxpayers are responsible for. But I do support increased funding for all of the things that our school so obviously needs, our school district.
Okay, thank you. Kate, go ahead.
Thanks. Yes, I'm off mute. I also support the budget. I've done a tertiary review and tried to stay up to date on the conversations around the budget this year. It seems reasonable. It seems like the budget proposed is addressing some needs that, and this is not the time, year 2 in COVID, to not give our students and our teachers and support staff what they need. This is really a time to invest in those resources. My understanding of the budget is that there's funding specifically for support staff like speech language therapy and guidance counselors and assistant principals. And I see this as ways to keep teachers' time teaching and learning and their area of expertise and providing those support staff roles to facilitate and foster a more holistic approach to our children's education. I absolutely support the executive director of equity's position. I'm really excited to see that investment, and I think that it's long overdue. I think there's going to be a lot of work needed around that. And playground upgrades is another piece, and that's play-based learning. We need to keep our kids safe, and I think now is a great time to have give our kids a chance to play outdoors and take care of one another and take care of our school infrastructure in that way. So what I've read from the budget so far, I think the increases are reasonable compared to years past, compared to our surrounding comparable districts, and I support the investments and the increases where they are.
Okay, thank you. And Michelle.
Oh, checking mute. So I also support this year's budget. I think it is entirely reasonable under the highly unusual circumstances of trying to run a district in our schools during a pandemic. I would add a couple of caveats that are not centered on this year's budget, but more forward-looking, having taken a look at it and listened to the budget presentations. I think it'll be really important to continue to keep an eye on making sure that there's no commingling of the federal ESSER funds with state and local funding. It's really important to keep those things separate. And I also recall from a presentation at a recent board meeting that there are staff ads in the current budget that are funded by ESSER. But when that money is gone in 2024, we need to make sure that we evaluate the needs and consider pros and cons of continuing to fund those positions. Like really scrub it. Do we need to keep those positions? And I realize that's a very hard decision to make at that point, because once people are employed, we certainly don't want to let them go. But I think we need to be really conscientious about it and make sure that we're not, and that we are guarding against unnecessary incremental expenditures.
Okay, thank you. And I would like to remind folks who are watching live that you can call in and ask questions of the candidates at 802-862-3966. So I'll let you know, candidates, if there are any calls coming in. Let's jump to another question, housing and growth. So South Burlington is facing enormous pressure as the natural site for housing in Chittenden County. Is this having an impact on the schools that needs to be addressed? Let's start with Michelle.
So I feel like I would need to know more about what's meant by enormous pressure to answer this question completely and thoughtfully, but I'll offer a few just high-level comments instead. I haven't really been attending DRB meetings or following the proceedings, so I don't come to the table with a strong sense of planned housing growth or its expected effect on the tax base or the student population growth in terms of the projections. Nevertheless, if there are plans in place for large housing growth to which we can tie a realistic expectation about student growth, then we have to talk about space and the possibility of new structures. But we also need to balance those discussions with up-to-date, credible research findings. As I mentioned, on the relationship between things like classroom size, teacher resources, student outcomes, and ultimately what level of financial burden is reasonable to ask the community to bear. 2 years ago, we had a very largely failed effort at a master visioning and planning that included a major reconstruction or build of new middle schools and high schools. And the voter population rejected that with a very wide margin. And so I absolutely agree that we need some good solutions here to make sure that our schools are in good shape, that the learning is happening, but we always have to balance that with, what's reasonable to ask of our community in terms of paying.
Thank you. Chelsea.
I definitely don't understand what is meant by enormous pressure. I will say that I tend to err on the side of reserving natural resources. But I do think that given the failure of the bond that Michelle just cited, there's a good opportunity or a reasonable opportunity to increase contact or just sharing opinions between school board, city council, elected officials, the experts, and then the community, and what the community wants, what the experts say we need, and trying to find a common ground between all of those parties.
Okay, thank you. And Kate.
I share many of the concerns that Michelle and Chelsea raised, and we'll be thinking about how this will roll out over the long term. But in the 2-year term that I am a candidate for, when I read this question and think about enormous pressure, I think about our current students and the enormous pressure that families, young families like my own, I'm 33, and I think traditionally I'm at the age where folks are supposed to be moving into their first homes. And many folks that I know in my neighborhood and in my community are renting and can't afford to own a home and can't afford rent anymore. And I think about the pressures that families and kids are under. And I'm thinking about how we can create safe and comfortable learning environments for our kids in the schools, particularly who don't have that safe, comfortable place at home. And what are the types of supports that we have in our school district, like free breakfast and behavioral health, dental care services, and mental health services, to make sure our children who are struggling with unstable housing and in unhoused families are, that's where I want to relieve the pressure.
Okay. Thank you. So Kate, we'll stay with you and move on to the next question. Do you support passage of H584, which would require standards in education designed to promote anti-racism in schools? Why do you support or not support this bill?
Thanks, Elaine. So, am I unmuted? Thanks, I just got a pop-up. Sorry. So my understanding of the bill in committee in the legislature is that this would develop a statewide certification program rather than a requirement, and it would create some statewide standards around anti-racist education. So that all, in theory, sounds really great to me. I know bills change over time before they're passed, but it sounds like this bill is working towards developing guidelines for addressing racial incidences in classrooms and in the districts, which I think is incredibly helpful. Increasing exposure to age-appropriate books on racism, and not only racism, but also on the lived experiences and joys and wonderful values that living in a diverse community bring to our lives. It seems to be really well aligned with the recent VT Digger commentary by the Vermont Student Anti-Racism Network, which I know there was a South Burlington student in that group. And I think this anti-racism work is a particularly important area for us to hear from the students themselves about what they're looking for and what books they're interested in reading, what literature we can bring. I'm also queer, and I know how important it is to have your education reflect who you are and stories and narratives that you learn about. You know, I want to see myself in my education, and I think our students do too. So I really do support the intention of this bill as it's in committee now. It may change over time, but generally speaking, it seems like it would provide a statewide network for towns and districts to share resources around anti-racist education, and overall would, you know, I support that investment.
Okay, thank you. Chelsea.
I have not read the bill, but I'm definitely a huge supporter of anything that's trying to increase equity in our school district and in our community. I believe that change really does start where you are. And so I'm really excited to see this be a major part of the school board's agenda. I'm also really excited and ready to help further any work to see critical race theory in our schools and just in general support anti-racist movements in our district, in our community.
Thank you. And Michelle.
I do support this bill, absolutely, and I really appreciate that you brought it to our attention. I hadn't been aware of it, nor the bill that it references from 2019 that provides some of the meat for what might be in classrooms as a part of this certification process. I found it thoughtful. I found it comprehensive in its content with respect to different approaches to teaching and learning that can improve inclusiveness of the many contributions made by diverse authors. And as Kate mentioned, and I agree with wholeheartedly, this kind of inclusion allows students from different backgrounds to see themselves in what they're learning. And you know, the research and thought work that's pouring out of universities right now, that really resonates with the work that's been underway. And all students, as she also mentioned, benefit from a diversity of literature and perspectives. I really wish I had had more exposure to such literature and to more diverse perspectives on historical events in my own K-12 education many years ago. As an aside, though, the short form of the bill that's publicly available, it doesn't address a really critical component that I hope it does, and this is just a bit of a commentary, because who designs and administers the certification program is really important, and the development of that is, and the standards is non-trivial. And evaluation materials as well. It requires many actors, piloting and study of impact and excellent documentation of the procedures and interpretive guidance. So I do hope these matters are considered during the development of the final bill.
Okay, thank you all.
Elaine, could I respond?
Yes, you have 30
if you
seconds.
Don't mind. It's not a rebuttal, but do you mind if I respond?
We'll treat it like that, and you have 30 seconds.
Okay, I just wanted to add that the 2019 Ethnic Studies and Social Group Studies bill that was passed did have a working group that came out of it. And I'm pretty sure that working group that's community-based, very representative, if that still exists, I think that would be a natural place for some of the work that Michelle brings up that would go. And I also wanted to recognize, I forgot to mention in my statement that there's strong Abenaki and Indigenous representation in that working group. And I think that is also incredibly important to have, and would hope that this bill would specifically address if it's passed.
Great.
Thanks.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Okay. So I'm just going to say one more time, if anyone is watching live, they are welcome to call and ask questions of the candidates at 802-862-3966. And we do have some time left, so I'm going to sneak an extra question in. That way we have, we can cover all sorts of stuff. Have you been paying attention to the pupil weighting study conversation at the legislature? And what do you think its impact will be on South Burlington schools? And let's start with Michelle.
I'm not aware. I don't know any of the details of changes to pupil weighting.
Kate.
I have, my day job is reading health insurance and healthcare policy, which is pretty heavy stuff. And I've been trying to pay attention to the pupil weighting conversations, and that is also really heavy, complicated formulas. And I am not prepared to share an opinion on it because I'm still at the absorbing stage. So I think it's really complicated and will have quite an impact on the state and our district. And I look forward to learning more and having trainings and watching that play out.
And Chelsea.
I also I can't form an opinion. I don't know enough about it.
Okay. I was trying to add a little time to the conversation, and none of you were very helpful with that. All right, I'm going to skip to another question. So this is regarding F-35s, which is something that has been a bit of a contention in Chittenden County in the airport region for quite some time. Has there been enough noise mitigation in schools neighboring the airport impacted by F-35s? Let's start with Kate.
Thanks, Elaine. So I don't know specifically the details of the noise mitigation that has been done or is in the works to be renovated in the schools specifically. I know about the home weatherization and noise mitigation work from my experience with the South Burlington Energy Committee, but I would wager to bet that it hasn't been enough. I went to St. Michael's College. That's what brought me to Vermont back in 2007, so I was a college student with the F-16s flying overhead, and it stopped class. And, it's very disruptive when you're in the middle of your final exams. It was also quite disruptive at 7:30 when I was trying to get those precious hours of sleep as a college student. So I'd wager to bet it's not enough. The F-35s are much louder than the F-16s, and I live in the southwest part of town, but I still hear them. And I think that there are long-term health consequences, particularly for developing minds and developing brains. I think noise mitigation and noise pollution should be treated just as seriously as smoke detectors and safe drinking water in our schools. So I would love to have an update and see a report of what has been done, and would be supportive, broadly speaking, of more noise mitigation if it's needed.
Great. Okay, Chelsea.
I am in complete agreement with Kate. I don't think I could say it better myself. I do think that the noise it's disruptive to learning, and that's not what the school board is supposed to be protecting, right? We're here to protect learning. So I'd also be interested in an update in the mitigation, but I know that classes are still being disrupted. So probably more work needs to be done.
Okay. Great, thank you. I'm going to ask a different question now. One of the effects of COVID that we haven't talked about is the impact on staffing at the schools, school bus drivers, other staff. What is your understanding of the staffing levels at the school district, and what are your thoughts about what the school board should do to address any issues that exist? And let's start with Chelsea.
I'm not sure that I know exactly. I certainly don't know any numbers about staffing and how COVID has impacted that, but I would imagine it's increased our need for substitute teachers. As far as I know, this year there haven't been any closures due to insufficient staffing, which is probably a good thing. That's pretty much all I don't know what is the current status of our staffing, but I'm sure that substitute teaching isn't inexpensive, and so that's not something to take lightly.
Thank you. Kate.
So I think that is a huge concern, and the workforce and staffing shortages are not limited to the school district, but certainly the school district is not immune. My partner is a nurse at UVM, and so I hear it every day. Our pillow talk is about the healthcare workers shortage, and really, I think that comes from a lot of burnout and hearing the essential workers in hero status without feeling that that respect for the work that you do. So I love my teacher friends. I think our support staff, our administrators, our custodians, the work that folks have been putting into our schools to keep our kids safe in the last 2 years is the most important work there is. And I'm incredibly supportive of our teachers and our staff. And I also am a community member, and we need to balance lots of priorities in our budget, but this is definitely an issue that is this is one of those things that the COVID impact is going to carry with us in the long term. But I want to make sure that the teachers and the staff that work for us feel appreciated and want to stay here, and that we can retain our teachers. And I also want to I think about attracting folks to South Burlington to live and work, and how we can continue to be a welcoming community, a place of belonging, and a place of affordability, not just in our schools, but in our community too.
Thank you. And Michelle.
I think of that question in kind of two streams, because there's the more recent surge that created a problem that may be different than the longer term retention problem. But first I want to say, I have truly found the efforts to keep kids in classrooms with teachers in those classrooms and the buses running on schedule almost 100% of the time to be really extraordinary. Our community and our teachers and our bus drivers and our staff and our leadership have really stepped up. Nevertheless, there have been consequences to that are, well beyond the control of, it was hard enough, I should say, right, to keep staff in place. And I know that's taken a toll. And for sure, I've heard the anecdotes, people are thinking of leaving the teaching profession or leaving the area. And so I agree that is certainly not something that I want to see happen. And certainly would work with my fellow board members to make sure that the policies that we think about really do focus on retention and valuing teachers, valuing the leadership. But I do still think that we need to be very aware that the consequences have occurred. They're not the fault of anybody, but we need to address a lot of elements of recovery. It's not just academic, it's mental health. Yeah, that's my ad lib response to a very good question. Thank you.
Okay. And one more question we have time for, keeping on the COVID theme. Today, the governor announced that he is recommending that schools with an 80% vaccination rate are advised to drop their mask requirements. Do you support this dropping mask requirements for South Burlington schools? Let's start with Kate.
Hot off the press, haven't even seen that yet. I think my top priority as a public service announcement is to get to that 80%, or even as close as possible to 100% on getting kids vaccinated. So that seems like a top priority for me before any changes to the mask mandate. But I also recognize that wearing masks for an entire school day is hard and stressful, particularly for younger kids, and with recess and with snow gear. So I think it's important to have benchmarks, and if the 80% benchmark is met, and we're moving in the right direction and kids continue to get vaccinated, then I think that and the case numbers continue to go down, then I'm certainly open to that. But I'm not at the school board yet, so I'm not making any decisions that are going to be written in stone. So I will end it there.
Okay. Michelle.
So I think I think it's pretty clear that we're headed towards treating this as an endemic as opposed to a pandemic. When that occurs is really hard to say. I really will, from my own perspective, I rely on the science, and working in the field of measurement and scientific research, the science isn't always consistent. It depends on who you talk to sometimes, right? This study says this study says that. So I feel like we will just have to do our best to monitor what that science is telling us, what the Agency of Education is telling us based on the guidance that they're receiving from health officials in the state and at the national level. And we'll make our decisions accordingly. It absolutely has to follow the science. It's to me, it's not a political matter. It's a public health matter. And I am not an expert in public health, so I will listen to the experts and I will do my best to make sense of what the experts are telling me, even when they disagree.
Thank you. Chelsea.
I completely agree with Kate and Michelle. Absolutely. I think the measures that we've been doing have been working. I do think that the guidance is kind of, in terms of just distributing and disseminating the information to the public, can be pretty confusing and convoluted. I'm a microbiology major, and I'm not an expert. That's what I have a bachelor's degree in, but I haven't been working in the field. And when COVID hit my household, I very quickly was researching the guidelines, especially having a newborn in the house. And I felt like the state guidance versus the CDC, it was very convoluted and confusing. It was, if you have a positive result on this day, then continue to mask, but not on this day. And after 5 days, even if you're testing positive, as long as you're masked, you can still go out in public. And it's like, well, I'm always masked out in public. So I think that whatever changes we make should be made very thoughtfully, because I do think that the measures that we've been taking have been effective, and any major change in that, I'd hate to see us start to slip back in the other direction, especially with emergence of new variants. I would take that guidance very lightly or seriously. I think that's the word I'm looking for.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have enough time now to have each candidate do a closing statement. So Chelsea, would you like to make your closing statement?
Sure. I definitely feel like there's a lot of work to be done. I think that the reason I'm running unopposed is some of the work that needs to be done is not necessarily easy or popular, but I think it's work worth doing. And I'm really looking forward to serving our community and just doing my best at every turn to make choices that I think are going to better our community. And I'm very open to listening and hearing other opinions, even especially those that differ from mine. And just trying to do what's best for everyone and not just myself or my family.
Thank you. Kate.
Thanks. I'm also going to take this time to address why I think that we're each running unopposed. And, I think it takes a certain level of privilege. I need to have the time. I need to have the energy, this is a volunteer position. So there's a certain level of like mental and physical ability to be in these long meetings and understand a lot of political policy details. So I recognize that privilege that allows me to serve, and I hope to serve our community well. And again, like Chelsea said, I'm very open to feedback, and I also want to know how we can make this more accessible, make this more accessible in the future. Thanks.
Thank you. And Michelle.
So I guess I will focus there as well. I do think I spent a lot of time, like an inordinate amount of time, given the questions that you provided on that question of why we're running unopposed, because I do wonder myself. And I can only speculate that it does have to do with a lot of what we're seeing happening around the country. You know, the boards and districts are under a lot of pressure given kind of competing schools of thought about really hot button topics, critical race theory, anti-racism, in our own little space here about, you know, the size of the construction and the expense that we're going to need for facilities.
Michelle, I'm sorry. Each candidate only had 30 seconds to do their closing statement. So I know it's not enough time, but it is time.
Yeah, I'm never good at that.
But I want to thank all three of you, Chelsea Tillinghast, Kate Bailey, and Michelle Boyer, who are all on the ballot this year for South Burlington School District. Thank you for being here this evening and answering the questions, including the ones that you weren't prepared for. And thank you all for tuning in to Town Meeting Television's ongoing coverage of local community candidates, budgets, and ballot items. You can find this and more forums on www.channel17.tv. Don't forget to vote on or before the first Tuesday in March, Town Meeting Day, March 1st, 2022. Early voting by mail is available by contacting your town clerk's office. Polls will also be open from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Thank you very much for watching.